Recently, journalist Ken Klippenstein from The Intercept published an article about David Grusch, the UFO whistleblower, and his medical history, revealing some very personal information. There's been some speculation as to how he got the information. So here's a clip from Breaking Points with Crystal and Sagar interviewing Ken Klippenstein.
Accusations are flying as journalist Ken Klippenstein has published a new report for The Intercept saying UFO whistleblower Dave Grusch, who recently testified before the House Oversight Committee, was at one point referred to a mental health institution following two 911 calls from his wife in what Grusch says is a PTSD-related alcoholic incident. Grusch and his associates initially accused the intelligence community of leaking non-public health records to Klippenstein, who has since revealed he in fact retained access to this information by Freedom of Information Act requests. Resulting dramas got both sides. They're accusing the other of not telling the truth to the public about the situation. So we've got Ken Klippenstein himself in the studio now. Join us defending his story. It's good to see you, Ken. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for coming in, Ken.
Great to be back with you guys.
All right, Ken. So let's get into the nitty-gritty, I guess, of the story itself. Let's start broad strokes. What is the story about? What is it?
Well, so he's kind of the star witness of the subcommittee that's looking at the UFO allegations. Not just him, but there are two pilots as well. And so in the reporting on it, I noticed a phrase popping up again and again: a decorated war hero, decorated war hero, decorated war hero. And I'm not disputing that he is, but when I hear that, it's kind of like, okay, well, where's the critique? Like, where's the negative side, or where's the vetting? And I didn't see any of that by any of the media. So I thought, well, I'm going to go and look and see what I can find. And so I know people both in DOD, in the intelligence community, and I did a call for tips to try to broaden the picture. It really just came from a mosaic of different sources that gave me ideas of what was going on. We can talk about that more. But really my motive was just, it didn't feel like anybody was vetting this guy.
So lay out the specifics of the story and what you found through your FOIA request.
So under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, you can request police records. They're called call detail records, CADs, obscure things that aren't kind of like the typical police report that journalists tend to ask for. And maybe that's how they didn't know it existed. I have some practice with FOIA. I've been doing this a long time. So when I got these back, it was two different incidents reported by his wife and previous wife, in which he had gone, in the second case that was in 2018, I think, he had gone into it's described as like an angry, drunken rage where he was suicidal, asked his wife to kill him. She called police, said that the guns were locked up, and then he was placed in a mental facility where after he was assessed and then released, I think, a day later.
Got it. And this happened 2014, 2018?
Both. Yeah.
Okay. So there's been a lot of back and forth. Grusch accused you of getting these things leaked by the intelligence community. You revealed it came from the Freedom of Information Act. You did a Twitter space last night. You indicated you were tipped off by this. So were you tipped off by members of the intelligence community?
It was both the Defense Department. I mean, again, it's a mosaic. You talk to as many people as you can because you don't want to be dependent on any one individual who might have a grudge or whatever it is. But yes, I did talk to both DOD people and intelligence people.
So in terms of the substance of the tip here, the accusation, I mean, aren't they fundamentally correct that, like, you are publishing dirt that was tipped to you by intelligence community?
Well, the thing is, when I put out my call for tips, I said, if you have anything positive or negative, because at the end of the day, like, I don't want to, he's a human being. I don't, to be candid with you guys so people can account for where I'm coming from, I don't believe in the UFO stuff. I think he's incorrect about it. However, I don't want to just punch at him. I would have included anything positive that I had gotten. Unfortunately, I didn't get anything. Now, that doesn't mean that he doesn't have, redeeming qualities. Everybody does, even me. But I just didn't happen to hear any of that. And so I had to go with what, I was told. And to give you guys a sense, too, I can speak to the characteristics of the sources because I understand why people are concerned about that because most of the reporting that you read is planted. When you go to the New York Times, most of those stories are planted by committee chairs, by the White House, whatever it is. That's not how I roll. I know I tend to talk to mid-level people, people kind of like Grusch, GS-14s, GS-15s, people who are experienced but didn't quite have the political chops generally to make it to the top. So those are the types of people that I was talking to. Just full disclosure, if you want to ask anything else about sourcing, I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, basically you're being accused of, like, this is a smear job. You're trying to undermine his credibility. What did you see as the value of this information? Do you think that the fact that he has a PTSD diagnosis makes him more likely to lie, make things up, and less credible in general?
No, absolutely not PTSD. But, you know, in the police reports, his wife called him an alcoholic and said that this happened repeatedly. That, I think, is a concern. I think that if someone's an alcoholic, yeah, that should be factored into your assessment of what their credibility is. But
Right, but if it's alcohol related to PTSD, I mean, let's be serious. I mean, he in sworn testimony, he admits he had a problem with PTSD. He says it was, I mean, I'm assuming he's related to these alcoholic incidents. He got treatment per your own reporting. And all of the incidents he's now testified to, sworn testimony as well as a whistleblower, is post-treatment. So I'm just trying to understand, like, what is the value of this information being put forward? And to be clear, you didn't do anything wrong. You're doing your job. We get crazy tips from people all the time here. So I have no issue with the Freedom of Information Act, even if you did report it, even if you did get a tip from the intel community. I guess it comes down to, like, the framing and the substance of, like, what are we supposed to do with this information?
Well, I included in the story an example of the dozens of White House staffers who had their clearances revoked for smoking weed, including in states where it was legal.
Right.
Places where it's legal. So, like, this is part of the clearance process. And so, again, this whole focus on PTSD, and if it makes him not credible, that was never something I said. That was a focus that he made trying to get ahead of the story in the statement that he put out. My interest was always the alcoholism. And, I mean, I guess I feel as though there's some kind of grandstanding around this stuff, because the reality is, if you're going to, say, get a medical procedure, go see a surgeon, you find out he's an alcoholic, that's probably going to factor in your deciding somewhat, right?
Right. Well, I mean, is he an active alcoholic? Do you know that?
We know that from the reports his wife said he was.
Okay, in 2018.
Yes.
But we don't know anything since then.
No.
Right.
So can you speak a little bit too, because part of the piece you talk about how, you know, in those instances you had White House staffers fired, that there is this, you know, very onerous procedure to get and maintain your security clearances. In this instance, you know, they knew about these police interactions and what had happened with regard to his wife at the time. They knew about the allegations of alcohol abuse, all of this stuff, and yet he was able to maintain his clearances. Do you read something nefarious into that, or is that an indication in his direction that, listen, they knew everything and they still thought that I was trustworthy enough to maintain these very high-level secret clearances?
That's what he said, and I think there's something to that, but there's also something of a boys' club. I don't mean in a gender way. I mean in like a senior level people tend to look out for each other. I quoted someone as saying that, and that was the general frustration of multiple people that I talked to, was feeling like they described this guy as unreliable, and they were frustrated that this stuff that they knew about was not being accounted for in these they were seeing the descriptions I was describing before. Decorated hero, decorated hero. Right. They didn't feel like that was the whole story.
I guess what I'm confused by is you're telling me this, but you don't quote any of these people in the story. Everything, the only facts that you can really attest to in the story are FOIA, and obviously the tip. And again, zero issue with that. But don't you think that's the actual relevant part? I mean, why aren't you quoting people on background and people who work for him who said he's unreliable? You're saying it here. I think that's fine. I mean, obviously,
sure,
it's a public forum, but the way that it's being read, and I have to be honest with you, I respect your work, but, you know, the assemblage of the facts here, it does kind of read as a smear job. You're basically like, he had a PTSD incident, or he says it's a PTSD incident. He had 2 alcoholics. You quote 2 people who basically say, you know, he's full of it. You only quote 1 expert who says that the UFO hearing is a travesty. And I mean, one of the things I really don't understand is how many conversations we had about Pentagon spinning us, but you're credulously citing the explanation, the 1990s explanation on Roswell, and credulously quoting like Susan Go, who's the Pentagon spokesperson, who said that he's full of it. I mean, why should we believe these people? Do you understand what I'm saying? The assemblage of the facts in your story, yes, taking as like, this guy's a liar. That's what
I think that's a good instinct. You don't want to side with the institutions, but I think you also don't want to reflexively oppose them. I'm not saying that you're doing that. I think that, you know, I have that tendency too. But again, these are not monoliths. The DOD, I'm not talking to the public affairs officer, I'm not talking to the senior executives. I generally try to go out and get a sense of like the mid-level kind of like rank and file people, because I think they tend to tell a more honest story. You talk to the politicals and it's just ridiculous.
I agree with you. I think you're doing the right thing. And you always, and I've always, you know, I've stood by a lot of your work, but I'm like, why aren't any of these people quoted then? Why aren't you quoting these people?
Well, essentially, the reason that I did the FOIA was because they're kind of describing it as unreliable. I'm thinking, well, do I want to just use this sort of innuendo, or can I try to substantiate it? And if you look at the FOIA request, you can FOIA my FOIA, or I think I posted it too.
You did.
I asked for a whole range of things. So this idea that I was being pointed at one specific event, that's just not true. People were describing things to me. It sounds like there's certain themes. I go on Nexus, which journalists have, and so you can find their home address. The home address was not furnished to me, and then you can just file a FOIA, and I did it for like 7 years. And so that was what came back. So there's no sort of, like, so I guess my answer to your question, I'm not trying to be evasive. Like, I did talk to intelligence and DOD. people. But the way in which that influences the reporting is a little bit more subtle than I think the discourse gives credit to. It's not like they're pointing you at one specific event. They give you a sense, and then you use that to go and use other methods to try to substantiate.
I don't want to belabor the point, but just so I'm clear in my head of kind of the timeline, you were seeing the coverage of this hearing.
Yes.
You took issue with the fact that, he made extraordinary claims. Right. And they're secondhand claims, and he hasn't produced publicly any evidence outside of his own testimony, which was being backed up by his personal reputation and credibility. You're frustrated by the fact that there doesn't seem to be a vet on the other side. And then you reach out to your sources, or do they come to help us understand the timeline?
All of the above. So there are people that I know in DOD and in Air Force that I figure probably know this guy, so I started asking them. They're telling me he's unreliable, and I think, okay, well, how can I find more? Because people have bits and pieces, it's not really enough to run with. So then I do a call out for tips. And in the tweet, I said, if you have positive or negative, because I don't, to the extent that there's always going to be a bias towards negative, because I used to work at Target as a cashier, and I remember the suggestion box, and I thought, man, those have all got to be negative comments. There's not going to be a single positive suggestion. So, there,
just read our YouTube section.
So there's not going to be, there's going to be that bias. But it's like, to the extent that I can, I'm trying to cast as wide of a net as I can to get different, so that's not just reflective of the circle that I have and the friends that I have. And the people that reached out, they told me largely similar, like in theme, stuff that the people that I knew were saying.
Right, and I mean, I get the problem though. It's like you're kind of saying there's a selection bias here, and one of the things Grusch has alleged is that he was retaliated against, and is being actively retaliated against by the intel.
And there's strong evidence for that.
Right.
I take him at his word for that. Yes.
But how do you know that you're not part of that, right? That the people who are reaching out to you aren't basically like, yeah, I mean, look, they're basically violating their job by talking to you in the first place and pointing to you towards each direction. Let's be honest, I mean, he's correct. And in that this is probably made known to his authorities. They probably took a look at his file and they gave you a call whenever they saw your number. Nothing wrong with that. You did nothing wrong.
Understand.
They're the ones who are doing it. But, I mean, do you not feel, though, as if you're part of a little bit of a campaign here?
No, that's a fair question. Again, that's why I try in my reporting to find them as opposed to them like coming to me independently, And they're, and again, these things are complicated. These are not monoliths. There's the senior executive class, there's appointees. Those guys are the demons that you really want to watch out for. And so, I mean, the people that I talked to clearly didn't like him, and they didn't believe him about the UFO stuff. And so, insofar as that is a motive, that's true.
Sure.
I want to be very frank about that.
Yeah, right.
But it's a little different than like a Biden administration appointee being like, this is embarrassing, we have to destroy this guy. It's so the concerns are fair, but I just want to point out that it's different.
So do you think that he's lying? Do you think he was misled? Do you think that, there's some sort of motive for him to, because, with whistleblowers, this comes at great personal risk. I'm sure this is not a fun experience for him. I'm sure it's not fun to have these things in the press and this type of personal scrutiny and some of the worst moments of his life dragged out in front of the public. So what sort of a motive would he have for not being honest and direct with the public?
I mean, around these issues, it's probably just embarrassing. I don't necessarily even fault him for not being more forthcoming about it. I blame the media.
I'm talking about why would he come forward with inaccurate claims to start with, the sort of things that he testified to? What would he stand to gain?
There's a range of claims he makes, and I think a lot of them are probably true. Where we depart is when he says that it's space aliens or that we've recovered. But the idea, I know from my sources, and I think parts of this are public, there is a UAV crash recovery program. There is constantly retaliation against whistleblowers. I know that because I work with them and there's data on this. It happens when you report something to the Inspector General, there's a target on your back. So I totally take him at his word on that. And his lawyer was a former Inspector General of the IC, very respected person. I know people that know him. All I've heard was good things. So the whole retaliation thing, I assume that's true. They don't like people going to Congress and reporting things.
No.
Again, where we depart is the specifics. I also think it's true that there is a UAV crash recovery program. I just think just because you don't know and can't recognize what the technology is, that doesn't necessarily mean it's extraterrestrial.
Right, but why don't you present evidence to that fact then? I mean,
how do you
believe it? Like, if you say you don't believe him, I mean, listen, I don't know whether I believe him or not. To me, it's just extraordinary whenever you're before Congress, you're telling this under sworn testimony. I'm like, okay, well, I want to hear it from the other guy. Sean Kirkpatrick says it's not true. To me, that's great. We got two people under sworn testimony. They say it's not true. Why don't you put forward a story then being like, yeah, he's wrong. The people are lying. Or, I mean, I used to do this for a living. You can quote these people and be like, Grusch colleagues say he's a liar. Grusch colleagues say that he's completely not true. I mean, this is where I just don't understand.
Well, I'm in a difficult position because it's like,
yeah.
I don't want to, I mean, again, I disagree with them, but it's like, I don't want to I want to rely on stuff that is really easy to substantiate.
Like FOIA.
Documents, and his wife, too.
Yeah.
Current wife, not just ex-wife. If I'm just going off of stuff that people don't like him said verbally, it feels kind of like a smear, you know, like kind of unfair. And so it's like, I get where you're coming from, but it's like, put yourself in my shoes. Like, how would you navigate these kind of vague descriptions, you know?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest with you. I guess so I'll come back to this.
Sure.
But on the alcoholism point, you keep talking about that.
Yeah.
I mean, so is it not a mental health issue then? Like, is it disqualifying in your mind? Being I mean, first of all, we don't know if he's an alcoholic, because why?
Right.
You know,
And
who
he
knows
says
what people say
He
on
says he's
911.
recovered from PTSD.
He says he's
very
recovered
clear.
from PTSD.
Yeah.
His best friend killed himself, according to him. I know for a fact he served in Afghanistan. You know, these are pretty traumatic events. Millions of veterans kind of suffer the same thing. So, I mean, are you saying that's disqualifying for the entire story? Like, that's what I think a lot of people are upset about. Yeah.
I don't think it necessarily is disqualifying. I think it might be. I mean, that's kind of why I put it out. People can look at it and decide what they think. I certainly don't want to have, like, it's crazy to have a blanket rule. Anyone who has a substance abuse issue should not be. That's clearly
You're right.
false.
And look, this man is asking us to believe something. He's asking us to believe unsworn testimony.
And crucially,
as you said, his reputation is what he said. It's a totally legit question. I'm more like, well, what are we supposed to believe here? And what's the implication? I mean, you know,
well, I just think it's more. I mean, people want to paint. Not saying you're doing this with this broad brush of it's false. It's and there are specific components to his claim. There's specific parts to his claims. And you know, his own lawyer, who I mentioned before, that law firm that's representing him has said that the reporting around the contents of his disclosures has been inaccurate. And I've never seen a lawyer do that in relation to, you know, stuff about a client. And so I think there's clearly something that's a little bit off here. And as to, you know, people disagree about what those details might be, but it's a spectrum of claims that he's making, you know.
Okay.
Last question from me, at least for you, Ken, is are you working on are there additional reporting pieces you're fleshing out right now? What should we be expecting?
Yes, I'm interested in industries interested in these kind of things, because you talked about the Pentagon's interests, which those are reasonable questions to ask, like what are Ken's, why are they telling him these things? But there's a whole nother interest group, which is aerospace, which has its own set of interests in making the public think certain things about not just UFOs, but aerospace phenomena in general. And so my hope is that can, and a lot of these representatives in Congress that staff the committees get money from these aerospace firms.
So are you saying that this is like a psyop by the defense contractors? I'm just trying to be clear on what you're out.
I mean, so Crystal asked me before, if I had to guess, I bet he believes it. I bet it's sincere. People tend to believe what they're saying. They tend to,
I agree.
And you know, I mean, it's not untrue. He was a decorated war hero.
Right.
That's not, you know, so I assume he believes what he's saying. I'm not someone, I hate this word grifter. People throw this word around so loosely, you know, it's like, how do you know someone's heart? You can't.
No,
right?
you can't.
So
I think it's fine to present the facts. Like I said, I mean, I'm just reading this story and you're like, you only quote two people, Jack Murphy and then this other guy. You're citing Roswell credulously. No offense, but like, that's crazy. That's like citing the JFK record and saying that that's the definitive norm here. I mean, when I'm reading this, all I'm supposed to take away is like, all right, you know, alcoholic, PTSD, guy's got mental health, two experts. You didn't present the other side. So do you see why people took an issue with it?
I understand.
Yeah.
I mean, to some extent, I'm in a position where it's like everyone is doing the decorated war hero, all this stuff. And it's kind of like, well, now my job is I have to try to give people stuff they haven't gotten.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to be totally candid.
You can talking.
Maybe that's bad, but that's
right.
I'm just trying to give you an insight of my thought process of what it is.
Well, I think people can take away from this what they will. And at the very least, I think it helped me understand kind of where you're coming from. A lot of other people, like I said, have questions. People watch this show. And I appreciate you coming on. I know it's not the easiest thing to take questions like this. So thank you. We appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys.
Thanks, Ken. Good to see you.